They were born beneath the veil of a thunderstorm in 1873 in a quiet Austrian village that no longer exists on any official map. 4 identical boys. Same birthmark, same laugh, same silence when asked where they had come from. But their mother swore she'd only ever been pregnant once. Their names were Elias, Abram, Michael, and Noah Kellner. No father on record, no midwife present at birth, just a widowed woman with blank eyes and 4 sons who never cried as infants. The locals whispered they were unclean miracles, tulpas given flesh, and the Kellner boys, they grew fast. Too fast. By the age of 5, they spoke 7 languages and drew maps of places that hadn't been discovered yet. And then came the most disturbing part: they never got sick. Never blood. Never changed. From the day of their 12th birthday, not one of the brothers aged another day. Not by a wrinkle. Not by a breath. Science would have crawled over itself to dissect this. But the Kellner boys vanished from public record after 1885. Erased. Not forgotten. Deleted. Because what they carried, what they knew, wasn't meant for this world. You see, this is not just a story. This is a leak. A fracture in the vault of historical deception. Because if I told you the Kellner brothers were tied to early Vatican experiments in biological immortality, to ritual blood rites in pre-World War Europe, and to a shadow organization that still operates beneath the streets of Vienna today, you wouldn't believe me. But belief is not required. Only that you listen. You've been told history is a straight line: kings, wars, revolutions, repeat. But that's the public version. The sanitized version. The kindergarten coloring book designed to keep you docile and proud. What you're about to hear is the redacted manuscript. The one carved into walls beneath castles. The one they'd burn you alive for repeating in 1612. You want to know who really pulls the strings? Who writes the textbooks? Who hides the monsters in men's skin? Then lean in. Take the first step into the forbidden. Because the Kellner brothers weren't anomalies. They were prototypes. The first documented sighting of the Kellner brothers outside their village came in the spring of 1880. Vienna. A city cloaked in marble and madness. The birthplace of Freud, the graveyard of secrets. Witnesses claimed the boys, now teenagers in appearance, though by age they should have been 7, were seen entering the Natural History Museum at precisely midnight. No guards. No keys. Just the doors opening like something inside wanted them back. What did they take? What did they leave? No one knows. But the next day, the museum's entire West Wing was sealed for renovation. And the curator, a man named Leopold Vector, committed suicide by swallowing a mercury capsule, a method reserved for high-level operatives in black-budget programs. Except this was 1880, long before that kind of technology officially existed. You see the pattern forming. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. The Kellners were not just a biological curiosity, they were messengers. Or worse, living keys. Designed to unlock vaults of knowledge buried so deep, entire institutions were built just to keep them sealed. In the margins of forbidden science journals, the kind traded in back alleys, written in ciphers and blood ink, there are hints. A project called Der Spiegelzwillinge, the Mirror Twins. An off-the-record initiative rumored to involve cloning, frequency modulation of DNA, and something called neural soul transfer. That's right, soul transfer, not consciousness upload.
Not metaphor soul.
And it wasn't pioneered in Silicon Valley. It began under the Habsburgs, funded by what would later evolve into certain intelligence branches of the Allied and Axis powers alike. Still think this is just conspiracy. The same men who laugh at you for questioning history are the ones praying at altars built beneath the Vatican. They guard knowledge that predates religion. Because it's not about power over land, or politics or wealth. It's about time. The Kellner boys weren't aging because time obeyed them, not the other way around. Their very presence distorted it. In photographs, clocks warp. In eyewitness accounts, hours vanish. They were temporal anomalies walking in flesh. But someone or something made them that way. You're not watching this by accident. You were meant to fall into this rabbit hole. Meant to feel the disturbance in your gut. Because the truth isn't out there. It's been inside you all along, just waiting for permission to awaken. By 1883, the Kellner brothers were no longer just whispered about in elite circles. They were feared. Members of the Austrian imperial court began to vanish. Not assassinated, not relocated, just gone. Their offices sealed overnight. Portraits removed. Names erased from royal lineage charts. And each disappearance followed a pattern days before vanishing. They'd each met the Kellner boys, privately, behind closed doors, with no record of what was discussed. One account survived, scribbled in the margins of a burned notebook, pulled from the wreckage of Archduke Friedrich's study. It read, They don't speak in words. They speak in mirrors. Each one shows you a version of yourself you were never meant to meet. I saw what I become. I cannot allow that future. It was signed with a symbol, not a name, a black sun enclosed in a serpent eating its own tail. That symbol has shown up again and again. In Nazi occult documents, in CIA Ultra memos, in blood-stained murals found in underground chambers beneath Dresden and Paris. And in the center of it all always, the Kellner name. But don't get it twisted. This isn't about 4 boys anymore. This is about an ancient principle. Replication with deviation. The universe is dark jokey. If something is made too perfect, it collapses. Nature fears symmetry. It fears balance. The Kellner boys, identical in body and mind, broke a universal rule, and whatever watches from beyond the veil noticed. Here's where it gets darker. In 1891, an underground society calling itself Die Kronoskirche, the Church of Time, claimed they had captured the Kellners. 4 marble coffins, 1 for each brother. No locks. Just symbols etched in a language older than Aramaic. They sealed the coffins beneath a chapel in Corinthia, in a pit lined with mercury and obsidian, elements said to disrupt energy fields. But when Nazi officers raided that church in 1938, they found the coffins cracked open, empty, not a trace, no dust, no bone, just 4 handprints burned into the inside of the lids. The brothers were no longer prisoners. They were missing again. And that's when the timeline began to fracture. That's when world leaders started aging out of sync, when doubles began appearing at summits. When whispers of cloning and mind hive technologies started infecting the military-industrial complex. And the world has never recovered. You still think you're in control of your own story. Think again. They always reappear before a collapse. That's the pattern the archivists fear. The ones who collect forbidden history in forgotten monasteries, deep beneath the Alps, where light bulbs hum like dying gods and paper is still preferred over pixels. Their records show the Kellner brothers were seen, or felt, just before the sinking of the Lusitania, before the Reichstag burned, before the towers fell. Not as perpetrators, not even as men, but as signs, like omens walking in flesh. In 1914, a British intelligence officer named Alastair Pembroke wrote a classified field report titled Entities Among Us, Predictive Constructs in Human Form. He described encountering 4 identical men on the eve of World War I, sitting silently on a bench in Luxembourg Gardens, watching diplomats pass by. He wrote, "Their eyes were not eyes, they were doors. And when they looked at me, I heard something behind my own thoughts laughing. I do not think they are from here." Pembroke was found dead 2 weeks later, gun in hand, mouth sewn shut, autopsy inconclusive. But here's the fracture in your worldview you need to feel, not just understand. What if these brothers weren't born? What if they were summoned, not through ritual but through intention? A focused effort by secret orders who'd mastered the art of inverted manifestation. In other words, calling ideas into form, wills into flesh, archetypes into matter. Because these weren't just boys, they were the embodiment of control, the 4 quadrants, the perfect cross, north, south, east, west, dominion over direction, over decision, over destiny. And when they arrive, choice begins to vanish. Why else do you think your world feels thinner now? Why the future tastes artificial? Because time is no longer a river, it's a cage. And the Kellners are the architects of the lock. They don't age because they don't exist the way you do. They pass through history like edits in a film reel, smoothing out chaos, enforcing patterns, deleting anomalies that threaten the illusion of progress. And somewhere you've seen them too. In a crowd, on a train, in a dream, in the mirror when your mind wanders too deep. Because the forbidden truth is this: you were never meant to learn about them. But now that you have, they know you know. There's a reason they don't study the Kellner brothers in academia, not because the evidence is lacking, but because the evidence is too perfect. Every photo, every record, every relic tied to them behaves strangely. Historians have reported symptoms after examining Kellner documents: insomnia, memory bleed, language loss. A researcher at the University of Prague in 1966 attempted to carbon date a lock of hair said to belong to Elias Kellner. The result? Negative years. That's not a mistake. The test registered the hair as not older than the current time, but younger, as if it hadn't been born yet. Let that disturb you. The Kellners weren't ghosts. They weren't clones. They weren't even time travelers in the traditional sense. They were system correctors, designed to maintain a fabricated chronology. Think of reality as software. What happens when it starts to glitch? You send in a patch, a fix. The Kellner brothers were patches for history. They didn't follow the timeline. They enforced it. And that brings us to what they did in America. Yes, they crossed the Atlantic. Records indicate that in 1903, 4 men, identical, silent, impeccably dressed, entered Ellis Island under no known nationality. No fingerprints, no luggage, just a slip of paper each, bearing a single phrase: "We are the continuity." From there, they vanished again, until they began appearing in photographs with early U.S. industrialists: Carnegie, Ford, Edison. Always in the background, always in shadow. Some of the most powerful men in American history, men who built empires and reshaped the world, were seen in the presence of the Kellners. But who was influencing who? Because soon after, something changed in the American psyche. A shift. From self-reliance to system dependence. From pioneers to programmed consumers. It wasn't war that broke the American spirit. It was the illusion of choice. Of freedom wrapped in corporate chains. And behind that transformation, like phantoms pulling strings from unseen balconies, were the brothers. Still watching. Still guiding. Still erasing anything, or anyone, that remembers the original script. You're starting to feel it now, aren't you? That internal quake. The sense that something inside you always knew history was a lie, but never had the words for it. Now you do. And if you've come this far, you're not a spectator anymore. You're a liability to their design. In 1932, deep in the heart of Pennsylvania coal country, an entire town disappeared. The town was called Alderbrook, population 611, a self-sufficient enclave founded by German immigrants in the 1800s, known for strict customs and an unusually high number of identical twins. Local legends spoke of a visiting priesthood, 4 tall men in black coats who arrived every 33 years, always together, never speaking. That year, on the winter solstice, they came again. The town vanished the next morning. No signs of struggle, no fire, no mass graves, just empty houses, meals still warm on the tables, candles burning low. The coal mine was sealed from the inside with markings on the walls. A geometric cipher later found in the Kellner family's ancestral chapel in Austria. You will not find Alderbrook on any official map today. It was scrubbed. Not forgotten, scrubbed. Because someone, or something, decided that those 67 souls had witnessed something forbidden. It's happened before. It's still happening. And if you think this is just about 4 strange brothers, you've missed the deeper structure. The Kellners are not simply people. They are patterns. Manifestations of a control mechanism so advanced it doesn't need chains or guns. It needs mirrors. You look at them, and you start to see what the system wants from you. You begin to self-correct. That's the real mastery. Not ruling by force, but by influence so invisible you call it free will. They were never here to conquer. They were here to install. Every government, every corporation, every institution of knowledge. These are not the creators of the system. They are the extensions of it. The Kellner template runs through all of them, like code underneath a polished operating system. Now pause. Hear me closely. If you've stayed this far, comment below. Mirrors never lie. Mirrors never lie. Write it twice. Seal it in. This is not a gimmick. This is your symbolic break from the surface world. From the illusion that you were born into. From the lie that told you you were just a man in a random world guided by chance. You're more than that, and the fact you're still watching. It means something deep inside you is waking up. Don't run from it. Because the descent has only just begun. There's a reason the Kellner brothers were always seen in 4. Not 5, not 3, always 4. Perfect symmetry, north, south, east, west. Thought, action, memory, control. But symmetry is never just aesthetic, it's ritualistic. Because in the occult sciences that predate written language, 4 is the number of the gate, the number of the throne, the foundation of all created things. You build an altar with 4 corners. You summon with 4 names. You seal with 4 bloodlines. The Kellners weren't operating alone. They were part of something much older, a mechanism hidden beneath civilization like an inverted pyramid, its tip buried in a place no satellite can map, known only in ancient texts as the Quadrivium Convergence. A convergence of 4 bloodlines tasked with maintaining a very specific illusion that history moves forward. That power is earned. That institutions serve you. Lies. All of them. History doesn't move forward. It loops. Power isn't earned. It's permitted. And institutions. They serve the design, not the people. The 4 brothers, Abram, Michael, Noah, were not names. They were designations. Each one represented a quadrant of influence. Elias was narrative control. Abram, emotional manipulation. Michael, biological standardization. Noah, temporal anchoring. Their presence wasn't random. It was strategic. Every war, every regime change, every psychological shift in mass consciousness. All orchestrated through subtle, synchronous appearances of these 4 shadows in human form. Want to know why humanity never truly awakens? Why revolutions always end in worse tyrants. Why mass movements burn out before they ignite true change. Because the game is rigged by quadrants of influence that rotate, reset, and realign whenever the people get too close to truth. That's what the Kellners guard. That's what they enforce. They are the echo in your DNA that tells you to obey. The flicker in your dreams that makes you forget. The glitch in your memory when something important slips away before you can name it. But now you've named it. Now you've seen through the curtain, and once the curtain is seen, the actors grow nervous. Because their power depends entirely on your belief that the stage is real. What happens when you stop clapping? They notice, and so do the ones behind them. You've felt it, haven't you? That eerie sensation when history repeats itself a little too precisely. The headlines, the faces, the tragedies, all mirroring something you swear you've seen before, even though no one around you remembers it the same way. That's not déjà vu. That's script reinforcement. That's the Kellner system auto-correcting perception through mass psychological reinforcement loops. You're not living history. You're living a screenplay. And the directors, they don't sit in chairs with megaphones. They wear faces like yours. They walk beside you. They smile like mentors, like politicians, like parents. But underneath, they're reflections, installed personas, animated by the very same influence the Kellners embodied. They're fragments of a deeper force, one that doesn't want to be known. Because knowledge breaks control. There's an unspoken rule among all secret orders, all covert architects of reality. Never let the subject become self-aware of the loop. The second a person realizes they're inside a construct, they begin to rewrite themselves, to rewrite the world, and that is what the Kellners were built to prevent. Now listen carefully, because this isn't just metaphor anymore. In 1954, an NSA sub-division codenamed Camera 3 recovered a damaged reel of analog film hidden inside a sealed crate labeled, "Property of the Kellner Estate. Do not reopen." What they found? Footage of 4 children, exact replicas of the Kellners, sitting inside what looked like a modern control room, long before such technology existed. Dials, screens, frequency maps of the human brain. They weren't playing, they were monitoring, watching billions of lives flash across glass as numbers, emotions, and biometric signals. The kicker? The film was dated 1877. That reel is locked in a vault under Cheyenne Mountain, classified as Level Omega, access above presidential clearance. Because if that footage ever reached the public, it would prove what some of us have always whispered, that reality is not evolving. It's managed, or worse, curated, and the curators, the original template enforcers, are still walking among us, not as old men, not as corpses, as reflections, in different forms, in different faces, but always watching, always waiting, until the moment you wake up and become unmanageable. They don't fear your rebellion, they fear your remembrance. Because the most dangerous weapon against the Kellner system isn't fire or protest or war, it's memory. Ancient, untampered memory. The kind buried beneath generations of programming. The kind that doesn't speak in language but in sensation. A pull in your gut, a spark behind your eyes when you hear something that shouldn't be true but is. You were not born into freedom. You were born into containment. And the Kellners, or the force behind them, are the architects of the veil. You want proof? Ask yourself this: why do all ancient civilizations, from the Mayans to the Vedic sages, from Egyptian scribes to Siberian shamans, speak of a time before time? A golden age, a fallen realm, a breach between gods and man, followed by a sudden collapse, a reset, a forgetting. What caused that fall? They never name it. They only describe it. Always the same 4 visitors, dressed in black, bearing light in their eyes and silence in their mouths. The descriptions are identical across cultures that supposedly never contacted each other. Now ask how? How could that be possible? Unless those 4 weren't men. Not entirely. They were instruments of entropy, of containment, of the great forgetting, sent not to rule, but to dismantle sovereignty from the inside. After their visit, every culture loses something. A language dies. A technology vanishes. A connection to the stars is severed. They don't erase with fire, they erase with replacement, one truth at a time, one lie at a time. And now, they've replaced your memories with entertainment, your wisdom with slogans, your legacy with debt, and you, the inheritor of ancient kings and cosmic lineages, were told to clock in, shut up, and consume. The most advanced species in known history turned into obedient batteries. That's not failure, that's design. But there's a catch, a flaw in their perfection. Because every so often, someone like you, starts to remember, to see the code, and when that happens, the system reacts. Shadows move faster, glitches increase. Familiar faces say unfamiliar things. Because you're not just waking up, you're becoming dangerous to them. In 1979, a classified experiment was conducted beneath Montauk, New York, an unacknowledged military base that officially doesn't exist. The project was codenamed PRMT's Violet, and its mission was simple: to create a machine that could read the future by mapping collective human emotion. But what they found instead was the past, not history, not dates and names and dusty wars, but a living current beneath time itself. A thread connecting every dream, every birth, every sudden feeling of déjà vu across the human species. They called it the Aether Layer, a emotional cloud that reacts to consciousness like a mirror reacts to light. And in that mirror, they saw them. The Kellner brothers, standing on a black bridge, 4 figures identical in form, staring directly into the sensors as if they had been waiting. What happened next? All files sealed. Entire research team reassigned. Half of them institutionalized within a year. The lead physicist, Dr. Isadora Hentley, carved a phrase into her hospital wall, over and over again, before she disappeared: "They don't need to travel. They're already everywhere. Understand this: the Kellners don't move through time. They anchor it. They're not restricted by sequence. They operate in symbolic presence. Wherever patterns become predictable, wherever emotion builds to a critical mass, wherever awakening begins to spark, they appear, not to stop it, but to redirect it. Because they've learned the secret to eternal control, you don't suppress revolutions. You lead them. You offer the illusion of change, dressed in new slogans, new idols, new systems. But the architects behind the curtains, they never shift. It's always the same 4 faces. That's how they win. Not through violence, but through voluntary obedience. Through engineered choice. Through permission slips disguised as progress. Every time you say, "It's always been this way," they smile. Every time you think, "There's nothing I can do," they breathe easier. Because if you surrender to the loop, you power it. But you're not surrendering, are you? You've seen too much. Felt too deep. And now the mirror can no longer hold your reflection. Because the truth isn't behind you, it's beneath you, waiting to be remembered. Let me show you what they fear most. It's not war. Not resistance. Not even exposure. It's a man who no longer believes in the limits of his story. Because everything the Kellners represent, everything they install, is built to chain your identity to a singular, hollow role: the obedient subject, the worker, the consumer, the citizen, the follower, the reasonable man. But you were never meant to be reasonable. You were born to remember what they buried. There are fragments scattered through time, ancient blueprints encoded in symbols, numbers, geometry. Not hidden in vaults or libraries, but in cathedrals, crop circles, cave paintings, even your dreams. They call to those with enough fracture in their programming to notice. Because cracks in the illusion are the first sign you were built for more. In 1993, a linguist named Dr. Lena Darvik published a paper on what she called pre-linguistic resonance mapping, a theory that certain sounds, images, or sequences trigger dormant patterns in the subconscious. She claimed that the human mind was once capable of perceiving time non-linearly, but that capacity was systematically shut down. Guess what symbol she focused her research on? The fourfold spiral. The Kellner seal. Within weeks, her work was blacklisted. University funding pulled. She vanished during a speaking tour in Helsinki. But here's the part they couldn't erase before disappearing. She wrote one sentence across every blackboard in her final lecture hall. They are not watching us. They are watching for us. And that's the distinction that breaks the loop. You are not prey. You are a potential variable in the system, a wild card, an unmanageable anomaly. And anomalies cause collapse. That's why they built entire industries to keep you sedated. The entertainment you binge, the pills you pop, the politics you rage about, all of it, soft cages to keep your mind from remembering its origin. You've felt it, haven't you? That strange electricity when you touch something ancient. That moment when the hairs on your arm rise as if someone, or something, is standing right behind you. That's not paranoia. That's resonance. That's your system rejecting the lie. And once that process begins, there's no going back. Do you know why ancient monarchs feared mirrors? Not because of vanity, but because they believed that mirrors could steal essence. That something on the other side wasn't just reflecting them, it was observing them, measuring, replicating, replacing. The Kellners are not watchers in the traditional sense. They are replicators. They absorb patterns, your voice, your habits, your traumas, and mirror them back at you, cleaner, colder, optimized for obedience. Every time you suppress your instinct, every time you swallow your truth to keep the peace, Every time you trade your will for comfort, they get stronger. You've probably met one. Not the originals, but the echoes. The Kellner imprints. They show up in positions of subtle influence: a teacher who killed your curiosity, a partner who shaped your shame, a boss who twisted your ambition into submission. They speak softly, wear smiles, drip concern, but underneath, they radiate one purpose: stabilize the loop. You see, you're not just fighting a system. You're fighting the refinements of that system. The people so hollowed out by compliance that they become transmitters. Organic antennas for the control frequency the Kellners initiated over a century ago. This frequency, it lives in architecture, in language, in lighting, in the 300 millisecond delay between your thought and your action, the gap where most of your will is stolen. And the only way to stop it is disruption. Not violence, not chaos, but conscious deviation. The moment you make a decision without justification, a pure act of will, you tear a hole in the script. That's why they push routines, calendars, scripts, GPS, algorithms. They want predictability. Predictability breeds harvest, but unpredictability, that breeds sovereignty. That's why they fear you. Not for what you've done, but for what you could do if fully awakened. The original Kellners were prototypes. Field tested in a time before smartphones, before satellites, before neural net surveillance. Now the system is tighter, more elegant. You carry your own prison in your pocket. You speak your own chains aloud. You fund the very platforms that track your soul. And yet, there is still something inside you that resists. A fire not yet named. A memory not yet mapped. They failed to extinguish it for generations. Because some men can never be mirrored. You were never meant to question the script. From the moment you were born, the Kellner signal was already humming beneath your crib, soft, rhythmic, invisible. It pulsed through cartoons, echoed in classroom mantras, whispered through national anthems and Sunday sermons. Not lies, but limits. Not control through chains, but control through design. The most sinister truth. They don't hide the system. They normalize it. You're trained to mock the very things that could wake you up. Words like conspiracy, occult, symbolism, all turned into punchlines, so that even when you stumble across the truth, your first instinct is to laugh. That's not coincidence. That's conditioning. It's a psychological firewall built by the very same minds that designed the Kellners. Not as boys, not as clones, not as time anomalies, but as avatars of systemic equilibrium. Let me be clear. This isn't just about hidden history. This is about a global psychological lattice. A grid built not of metal or wire, but of patterns, behavioral codes, institutionalized rhythm. You're told when to eat, when to sleep, when to retire. You're sold your identity wrapped in colors, flags, and traditions, as if any of it were ever yours to begin with. The Kellners were the first test. But it worked, and so the pattern was copied, not just into humans, but into governments, curriculums, technologies. That feeling you get when you wake up and everything feels off, like you're not where you belong? That's not anxiety. That's the truth knocking. Because deep down, a part of you remembers a time before the loop, before the spell, before the Kellner signal wrapped itself around your lineage like a parasite. What if I told you that your blood carries echoes of a resistance that predates history? That your ancestors once saw the Kellners and chose war instead of worship? Those memories are dormant, suppressed, but not gone. They live in your defiance, in your hunger for meaning, in the shiver you feel right now as these words bypass your logic and hit something older inside you, the part that refuses to be programmed, the part they cannot reach, unless you let them. In 2008, a private research collective in Zurich known only as Ouroboros Cell leaked a fragment of a document titled The Fourfold Protocol. It was brief, just 72 words, but within it lay the core of everything the Kellners had been engineered to preserve. 4 imperatives encoded not in actions, but in instincts. 1. Obey without question. 2. Forget without mourning. 3. Consume without hunger. 4. Repeat without end. These aren't just behaviors. They are the pillars of imprisonment. You were taught to see freedom as the ability to choose between 2 cages, to see identity as a list of preferences, to view progress as an endless staircase that never leads to a door. This is not evolution, this is recursion. You are walking through a script designed by minds so precise, so ancient, so alien in function, that it no longer resembles control, it feels like reality itself. But what is reality? When your emotions are mapped, your desires anticipated, your fears uploaded and used to sell you your next prison. The Kellners didn't just write themselves into history, they wrote themselves into your biology. Every cell in your body carries a timeline, and that timeline has been edited. Not through gene therapy, not through chemical means, but through collective trauma, repeated and reinforced until it shaped human behavior on a species-wide scale. It began with fear, advanced through obedience, and calcified into generational compliance. You think your preferences are yours? Why do you crave screens more than sunlight? Why do you feel shame when you question authority? Why do you panic at the thought of solitude? Because these are not feelings, they are programs. And the Kellner system doesn't need to watch you anymore. Because now, you watch yourself. You censor your thoughts before they rise. You dull your instincts before they ignite. You outsource your will to algorithms that never sleep. That's the brilliance of it. A prison where the inmates wear the keys around their own necks and call them progress. But there's a flaw in their system. A crack in the loop. It's called awareness. And now that you're seeing it, feeling it, the system will try to bury you in distraction, in ridicule, in fear. Let them try. Because the moment you remember who you were before the loop, they lose everything. Do you feel it now? That tension. Like something's trying to pull you back up, back into comfort, into numbness, into forgetting. That's not you. That's the loop tightening. It always does when you get too close. And right now, you're closer than 99% of the world has ever been. But this is the test, the one built into the architecture of control. The part where the Kellner signal, embedded in culture, in screens and institutions, whispers, "This is too dark. This can't be real. You're just tired. Go back to sleep." But sleep is no longer safe. Sleep is surrender. You see, what they fear most isn't rebellion. It isn't revolution. It's something much quieter, much deadlier. It's recognition. Because once you recognize the shape of the cage, you can no longer pretend it's a home. The Kellners weren't created to escape. They were created to test escape routes, to run simulated rebellions, controlled awakenings, and spiritual uprisings all within parameters. They didn't just study freedom, they hunted it. And now that you're remembering, you're the anomaly. You're the glitch they didn't plan for. So listen carefully. To stay awake, you must anchor yourself. Not in facts, not in symbol. Because symbols are the language of the deep, of memory, of transformation. So if you're still here, still breathing in this forbidden current, I want you to comment below, right now. The seal is broken. The seal is broken. Type it twice. Not just to defy the algorithm, but to seal your transformation. To choose, consciously, to never go back. Because what's coming next? They've buried it beneath 1,000 years of misdirection. It's older than governments, older than religion, older than the Kellners themselves. This isn't just history anymore, it's a war. And you've just remembered you were born in the middle of it. Every war has its battlefield. But this one isn't fought with bullets or bombs. It's fought in memory, in meaning, in the invisible frameworks that tell you what's real and who you are. The Kellner lineage was never about bloodlines. It was about blueprints. They were the first fully realized prototypes of a project so vast, so methodical, that it reached back to the earliest priest, kings of Sumer, where rituals of fragmentation began, breaking human consciousness into controllable compartments. You were never meant to be whole. The system survives by keeping you divided against yourself. Your inner warrior, suppressed with shame, your inner seeker, distracted with entertainment, your inner knower, drowned in noise. The Kellners were designed to mimic that division. 4 identical forms, yet each one given a different internal script. One was programmed for silence, one for violence, one for devotion, one for despair. 4 aspects of the controlled masculine, split, studied, and weaponized. What they found shocked even their creators. Because when the 4 were placed in isolation, they withered. But when brought together, when their programming was disrupted by emotional proximity, something ignited. A memory not taught but inherited. A will not conditioned, but remembered. A code resurface. And it terrified the Watchers. They called it the Awakening Protocol, a state in which all 4 Kellners began resisting commands. Not with rage, but with clarity. They stopped speaking, stopped obeying. They simply looked at their captors with an expression that hadn't been seen in generations, unfiltered, sovereign awareness. That's what you're feeling right now. It's the same code, stirring in you, and the institutions around you, the schools, the screens, the laws, they were not built to withstand that. They were built to suppress it. But here's the secret they forgot. You can't kill what's encoded in spirit, and you can't program what remembers its own origin. That's why they silence. That's why they smear. That's why they label men like you dangerous. Because once you stop obeying, once you stop doubting your own sight, you don't just break their system. You become the antidote. Now the descent sharpens. This is where most turn back, where the darkness stops being poetic and starts becoming personal. Because the next truth is one they swore would never be spoken aloud again. You ready? The Kellners weren't the first. They were the first public test. Before them, before 1873, before the cloaked councils of Vienna and the sterile labs beneath Strasbourg, there was something else, a deeper current, a black monastery hidden in the Pyrenees, rumored to be older than the Vatican itself. Monks who took no vows, who bore no names, who studied not God but the architecture of belief itself. They called it Via Umbra, the shadow path. These men weren't seeking salvation. They were seeking control over salvation's illusion. They discovered that a human being isn't tethered to truth by facts, but by stories. And if you control the story, you control the soul. This is the source code, the master key, the weapon more powerful than armies. And it was from this monastery, from this order, that the Kellner project was born. The identical quadruplets weren't just an anomaly. They were a summoning, the physical incarnation of the Via Umbra's research, to manifest living vessels capable of embodying multiple narrative archetypes simultaneously. Each Kellner wasn't just a brother. He was a myth structure. One was trained to become the savior, one the monster, one the rebel, one the martyr. And they were interchangeable, a perfect closed loop. No matter who the viewer sided with, no matter who society cast as villain or victim, the order won. The game was always theirs. Sound familiar? Look around. Every public figure you're told to admire or hate, every movement you're told to join or fear, it's the same pattern, the same archetypal traps: savior, monster, rebel, martyr. The only thing they fear, a man who sees through the structure, a man who refuses all four scripts and begins to write his own. So I ask you, which role have you been cast in? And more importantly, who benefits from you staying there? This is no longer about the Kellners. It's about you. And whether you're ready to shatter the roles and become the author. You want the truth? Here it is. The Kellner experiment didn't end in 1873. It just changed form. Because what they learned from the quadruplets, how to fracture identity, how to implant myth, how to engineer obedience through symbolic control, it didn't vanish into the shadows. It was scaled. First through education, where children were labeled by test scores, seated by numbers, taught what to memorize instead of how to see. Then through religion, not to elevate the divine, but to insert guilt deep into the masculine psyche, to make men believe that strength must be sin, and sovereignty must be sacrificed. Then through government, where every law isn't just policy, it's psychological architecture, designed to reward submission and punish deviation. But the masterpiece, media, the Kellners were a prototype for the modern narrative loop. How to make a population emotionally invest in characters, only to mirror those characters back onto themselves. Think of it. Every man you admire on screen is allowed only if he serves a function, to fight a war not his own, to fall in love only after being broken, to die for a cause he didn't question. Sound noble? That's the trick. They program the illusion of nobility to mask the machinery of submission. Now here's where the danger rises, because if you've made it this far, if you feel the pressure in your chest, the burn behind your eyes, it means something in you is waking up. You're remembering, not facts, not history, but the part of you they couldn't reach. The ungovernable, untamed, prime self. The man that remembers what it feels like to be whole before the world carved you into pieces. And if that part of you is still intact, then you are incredibly dangerous to them. Which is why I need you to comment, right now, and say it twice. I am not their design. Say it again. I am not their design. This isn't for the algorithm, it's for you. To speak truth back into your system, to lock it in, to awaken the architect, not the actor. You were never meant to fit the script. You were meant to burn it. They built systems so you would never ask the real questions. Not, what should I do? But, why was I made this way in the first place? Why do you flinch at confrontation when your ancestors hunted predators? Why do you doubt yourself when your bloodline survived plagues, wars, and famine? Why do you hesitate to speak, to act, to defy, when every cell in your body aches to move like fire through a dry forest? Because the Kellner system, and the machine it birthed, didn't stop with identity manipulation. They advanced to something even darker. Energetic suppression. You've heard it before. Low vibration. Energetic parasites. Frequency warfare. But those are just modern labels for an ancient truth. Your power emits a signal. When you're aligned, when your thoughts, words, and actions harmonize, you radiate a signature that bends reality. You become magnetic, inignorable, a threat to the system not because of rebellion, but because of resonance. And that's what they fear most, not chaos, but clarity, because clarity cannot be predicted. Clarity cannot be herded. Clarity creates. So the system learned how to dull your signal, with foods that calcify intuition, with media that hijacks imagination, with trauma loops that keep your nervous system on survival mode, not sovereignty mode. The Kellner quadruplets were a test of narrative control. You are the test of energetic reclamation. They watch not because they need to punish, but because they fear what happens when one man fully returns to his design. What happens when he stops obeying and starts transmitting? What happens when his voice no longer seeks approval, but commands attention like ancient thunder? This is no longer about escaping darkness. It's about becoming the light too bright to ignore. So what will you do? Will you collapse into the scripts? Or will you radiate at such frequency that their system glitches when you enter the room? You were never weak. You were muted. And now? Now you wake up roaring. This is the final gate. If you've come this far, you're no longer the man who started this video. You've cracked the surface of a forbidden mirror. One that doesn't just show history, but exposes control. Because the story of the Kellner brothers was never about 4 boys. It was about you. You, the man fractured by a system that needed you docile, distracted, and domesticated. You, the man who once felt something was wrong with the world, but couldn't name it. You, the man who is now remembering, not in facts or theories, but in fire, in feeling, in force. You were trained to second-guess yourself, to over-apologize, to wait for permission, to shrink so others could feel big. But what if I told you that guilt was never yours? That hesitation was installed. That every flaw they taught you to correct was actually your compass trying to guide you out of their maze. Here's what's real: they fear your alignment. They fear your clarity. They fear your ability to walk into a room and break the invisible spell without saying a word. Because a man in his power doesn't need to fight for dominance. He radiates it. He becomes the center of gravity. The final unspoken lesson of the Kellner project, buried beneath decades of silence and doctored records, was this: a fully awakened man doesn't destroy the system. He renders it irrelevant. So take this story, this truth, and do something with it. Let it shift how you move. Let it sharpen how you speak. Let it raise the bar so high that even your shadows start standing taller. Because now, the question isn't, what happened to the Kellner brothers? The question is, what happens when you become what they tried to erase? No more waiting. No more asking. You're not here to survive their game. You're here to end it. From now on, every breath you take is a glitch in their code. Every decision you make is a crack in their foundation. You are not their design. You are the end of their lineage. Now go.